or any other of the mundane science. It is a metaphysical science. Meta meaning above or and mental. Essentially of that which is invisible, examining and explaining that which is visible. Those who are considered and have been for generations and eons and ages to be wise and knowledgeable, illumined, saintly, divine, and powerful, understood the laws that govern the universe, the laws that govern human behavior, and that governs the mind that we live, move, and have our being in. That is not Jesus. To the dismay of all the good Christians, it is a universal field of energy that has no personality, form, or individuated character, but contains all that exists on the three-dimensional plane of existence. That is the mother, Zoodokias. We'll get back to that. What I'm doing today is introducing this course on the science of astrology and what it is, what we're going to look at in the, it's going to take more than 12 weeks to get this done if I'm going to be proficient in it, but we're going to start with a 12-week course in looking at the knowledge of self, the knowledge of God, and the knowledge of the universe. And we want to understand that this knowledge comes from the one universal language that's spoken from one end of planet Earth to the other. And that language is symbology, the universal language of divine mind as reflected in manifested nature. And I should have my apple here now, but I don't. If you want to examine the reality of symbology in its context, you first can just look at the five-pointed fish. You can look at the Macintosh apple, which comes out of Washington, D.C., I understand. Slice it laterally and open it up. And this is the arrangement you will see in perfect geometric symmetry. A five-pointed star inside of an apple. And this apple represents, or the star of it represents, man in his dramatic stance, arms extended like this, arm, leg, arm, head. Did anybody hear that? What I said? Okay. That's important to know because we're going to climb over the boundaries of religion into the universal religion, the religion of knowledge, the religion of wisdom, that allows us to grow and expand with whatever spirit one receives. So your religion takes a back seat when you're in search of the unity of the faith towards the knowledge of the Son of God to the measure of the fullness of the statue of Christ. That's what this is. The unity of the faith is the oneness of photius. Self-confidence is what faith really means. And without it, you can't get from here back to your car. And you can't get up out of the bed if you have no confidence in yourself. And there are those days when our lives demonstrate that in an experience. We get so depressed, so outworn by the horrendous circumstances, we don't want to get up out of the bed. I know I've had it. I put $20 on the number one day. And I had the real number in the back of my head. It wouldn't play it. Took $20 straight on the number. And the number in the back of my head came out. I was sick. I mean literally, I got ill in my solar plexus. I couldn't get out of bed the next day, you know, because I only had about $25 that day, you know, but I was so sure about this number. But our psychology can beat us to the point where we become really, and when you're psychologically defeated, you're really defeated. You know, so someone can tie you up, bind your foot and hands, don't mean shit. If you can get your adrenaline flowing, you know, you can break that loose. But when they tie up your key, they tie up master. You know, when the great harm of slavery is they stopped us here. The great harm. The rest of it is all secondary to the mind thing. Towards the unity of the faith, to the knowledge of the Son of God. That's what we see here. And I'm supposed to bring the other illustration. I have a picture of the Sphinx, which is earmarked to almost the exact center of land mass. Not the center of the earth, land mass. Okay, because most of the surface of the earth is covered by water, not by earth. Most of the earth is underwater on planet Earth. But land mass, the Sphinx, which is the image of a black man. Of course, I know you all know that. And if you don't, all you do is take out the dollar bill. You've been carrying it around. Everybody talks about the portraits of Washington, Grant, and Lincoln and so forth. They never talk about the image that's on the other side of the dollar bill because they don't reflect and correlate the pyramid with the Sphinx, but they're juxtaposed within the same landmass. I mean, you know, but until you're into the knowledge, then when you pick up a dollar, you start seeing yourself and the knowledge of yourself on that one piece of paper where those symbols are only on the dollar bill. Towards the knowledge of the Son of God, to the measure of the fullness of the stature of Christ. This represents the physical, the perfect body. This is a perfect measured building that has, according to Peter Tompkins and other quote, and I put that in quote, Egyptologist, has all of the mathematical measurements on planet Earth. All the knowledge of math is in the pyramid of Giza. The perfect man is given in terms of the circle and the square. When one is standing on the square, they're standing in the position of one who has mastered himself. You can watch out. When this brother here got married, and he was standing listening to the ceremony. He was standing like this at first, and the brother who was marrying him said something, and his right foot went out like this. You know, I don't even know if he knew it or not, but I was, you know, watching. Did you know it? All right, okay. I mean, sometimes we do things subconscious that relate where we are in our development. You see a human being with his hand here. He's about to express wisdom. Okay? The solar plexus represents wisdom. When someone grabs you and says, "Oh, my stomach hurts," it means he needs some more wisdom, because the stomach ain't down here. His stomach is up here. This is the colon, the small and large intestinal tract. Okay. Islam is not a religion. That's a code. These are English words, not Arabic letters. Those are English letters. Okay. And one thing we need to understand about all languages. All written forms of languages are symbols of thought. When you write something, you cannot write the language. You write the representation of what you're thinking, what you're saying, and what you mean. That's all letters are. That's all characters are. That's all hieroglyphics are. And all language, as can be shown, began from the, quote, so-called Egyptian hieroglyphic form of writing. So-called because Egypt is not a legitimate Egyptian word. Okay, we're going to spray and sprinkle the science of astrology with Moorish science for those of you who have not had the opportunity to attend any of the classes or lectures on Moorish science. The star, the moon, and the sun are what we're talking about as power, energy, and intelligence. Okay? The measure of the fullness of the statue of Christ is seen in the square of the pyramid at Giza at the base. It is squared perfectly at the base. When the length of the latitude equals the length of the longitude, you have a square. Okay? You have directions: north, south, east, and west. You also have the 4 cardinal points of measure. This is the science of your ancestors as navigators, demonstrated most handsomely and recorded in Europe, though they had been demonstrating navigational abilities long before they went to Europe, as well as afterwards. That's how they got from Africa to the Americas, as Ivan Van Sertima reports in his book, They Came Before Columbus. Any of you brothers had a chance to read that? You have? Very good. I like this brother. He's in college, but he ain't letting it interfere with his cultural education, which is important. And I often wonder if the sisters at Spelman are doing likewise. I suppose many of them are. I'm more willing to give credit now in '96 to the psychological expedience of many black youth towards knowledge of self, because it's been released. Many are listening and many are not. Fortunately, some are. We're going to talk about each one of us as an individual from a degree point of view, that you were born at a specific time in space, in a specific place, in time and space and circumstances. That's really your address. Okay. And your spiritual name at this point is found in your 30 degrees as a symbolic representation. Okay? Keep that in mind. A symbolic representation. The reason I said what I said earlier when I started is to fascinate you and at the same time give you another perspective of who you are and identity. You're also your first name, or your name as you have it on your birth certificate. There's a whole science dealing with that called the science of numerology. But I want you to look at this. What does that word say? Brother there. Signation. Right. No, you said it right first. Okay? That's what we're doing with symbology, with names and birth data. We sign nature. And the reason that's in the dictionary, because the one who brought the vocabulary to the Western Hemisphere was a son of his mother. What did I just say?
Amazing.
All right. Let them respond. We know you know there's more. He wants to show off. Okay? Noah, Daniel Webster, was a high potentate. They sent him to America. They sent Masons to this country to start and finish revolution. They talk about the Minutemen. It wasn't them. It was the Massine who sat back in closed doors and plotted and planned to take this land away from the jurisdiction of the Queen of England. Okay? And they did it with the knowledge of the Moors, which is now called Masonic, at least in many quarters. Some of it is just ritual, which we'll touch on in the course of these 12 weeks. If you study in 12 weeks, you will not be the same human being you were and are today. I guarantee you that. This is the knowledge that touches the mind. And that's the definition of teach. I'm not lecturing. When I start telling you the truth about yourself, your spirit and your soul consciousness will respond, and it will change your perspective about you and the people in your world. That's what true knowledge does. That's the difference between the spiritual path and the religious path. In religion you hear about Jesus, or Muhammad, or Buddha, or Moses, whatever branch you might foster in. Of course, they're always better than we are. And none of them said that. Okay? But in order to get down on your knees to worship someone, that someone has to be better than you, or you can't get down on your knees. You see? And in the real of knowledge, you're not. You're only supposed to bow to your mother, you see, who is responsible for your creation day. I was supposed to say that the Masons, when they write, said I was created on. They don't say I was born on. I was created on. Because they were born in 9 months. And we all know there are 9 planets in our solar system to this particular date of the knowledge recorded. The reality is, in theory now, it'll be fact maybe 20 years from now, maybe sooner, that there are 12 planets in this solar system. But we're not getting the energy, and we're not responding to those other planets. We're responding to the 9. Actually, we're only responding to 7 planets. The sun is not a planet, and the moon is a luminary. Is a luminary that reflects energy more than it gives off energy. But it has to have some energy, otherwise it couldn't stay up there. Energy keeps everything in existence. So I've heard someone say it's a dead planet. Well, if it was dead, it would fall apart. You know, as we see anything else that loses life force, disintegrates, and the moon is not disintegrating. So, but it reflects the light and energy of the moon. The 12 signs represents, where's or is represented on and by what we all know and adhere to with more faith than we do our, that's a terrible circle. More than we do our any other symbolic format is the clock. Astrology represents nature's clock. Why it is referred to in Moorish science as the clock of destiny. And the interesting factor here, on this particular chart, there's a black woman in the center of the circle. I don't know why that name, I guess I'm trying to forget it, where this chart came from. There's a white woman in the circle, because that's their mama. But the reality of this particular symbol does not represent a person, but represents the mother universe, Zodiakias, okay, which means circle of animals, so recorded in, now don't write that down, circle of animals as so recorded in the Greek dictionary. And it does not, there are no animals in the sky. Those are circles of power. Okay, but in the symbolic representation, because what the ancients did was inscribe these concepts in part animal form and part human and part symbolic. That's where the concept of animal comes from in relationship to what's in the constellational panorama that we view partially at night, and how the concept became so inscribed in the education system, particularly by the astronomer who in approximately 1929, but in 1928 is when they began trying to find some reason for what was going to happen. The stock market crash, you recall, in history, happened in 1929, and big wigs, the super rich. I mean, if you had $1 million in 1929, you were super rich. Like now, brother got $1 million. Hell, he's still nervous. Jumped out of windows, blew their brains out, poisoned themselves because they lost their money in the stock market. And in the background were this small group of people all over the country that were trying to tell folks, look, something is going to happen in the stock market and it's going to fall. Some did withdraw their shares, their money, sold their shares, the wise ones, and most of them did not. So after it fell, before this time, astrologers and astronomers were almost synonymous. There was credibility among both, even in the same schools. It was after this fall of this big money thing that almost ruined this country that the astronomers turned viciously on astrology and went out with a witch hunt. They're the ones that caused it. So they told us not only they caused it, that was the devil. And they literally broke into some of their stores and offices and went after them with sticks and clubs. I mean, you know, that's how ignorant. Even this was the quote so-called upper crust of folks. This wasn't the working man. The working man didn't have no damn stock, you know, except a few. These are folks with the ties and cane and the gloves in the hand, you know, acting like barbarians. But that was the big divorce between these two schools of thought. And since then, and only up to recently, has astrology and astronomy almost made friends. They really aren't back in the same area. But the school of thought is there. The big hand and the small hand on the clock of destiny would be these two planets. And the 12 numbers on the clock are and would be the 12 signs of the zodiac. That's a perspective we're going to keep throughout this whole 12 weeks so that you can relate this to something you see every day. You see? And the 8 planets, because most astrologers include the moon as planetarial, and virtually is not, but that's nitpicking. The 8 planets are the other hands on this clock, because those are the things that keep moving. The zodiac belt is not real. It is imagined. In fact, the truth of Mathematica is that all Mathematica is imaginary. You see? The distance from here to the door of that particular store across there can be imagined. You see? You can figure it out in your imagination. The whole factor of measuring is imagination. Yes.
So you're saying mathematics?
Mathematica, the Latin word, means astrologer. Arithmetica means the art of counting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mathematics
means astrologer, the ones who measure the distance between planets and people. is where your ancestors and what your ancestors used this developed, evolved system over millennia. Nobody in any of these books give you a specific date and time when astrology started. But I love what Dr. Hendrik Clark said about the African along the Nile. It was at that point that the African sat down when he decided at this place he could grow food, he could build houses, he could raise his children, his family, and stay in the same place, because this flood, this blessing, was going to come at a certain time every year. He could bet after the calculations from one season to the next that Nile was going to flow. And black folks got busy weeks ahead of time because they knew what was coming, bringing 6 inches of the richest soil from 410 miles away, bringing gold in water and mud 410 miles, man. That's a long, 4,010 miles. No, 4,100 miles away. Flowing not downhill, flowing uphill. That's the Nile. The font of Egyptian, quote, so-called Egyptian civilization. At that point, the black man and woman could sit down and think. Could sit down and write. Could sit down and figure and measure. Calculate. Procrastinate. Make a prognosis, not procrastinate. Make a prognosis. See? Could expect something tomorrow, next week, next month, next 10 years, next 20. That's when civilization began. Time begins when somebody said, here it is here, that the sun comes up here in the east, not in England, as all the astrology books are calculated to Greenwich Mean Time. We'll get into that. But is found to rise in Madras, India. That's what C.M. Bay brought forward, and the rest of the astrologers hid. And when it got from here to here, it could be measured. And it not only could be measured, damn, I wish I had brought that, what's it called? It reflected on the side of this building. Then when it got here, it reflected on this side of the building. And it cast a deep shadow on the other side. So they could measure it. See. Then they could lay a stick out and see that the sun and the shadow would measure the stick equally each day. Well, it's 24 hours in a day. There's 24 of these between the time the sun rose and set. That's what your parents were doing. See? That's where this comes from. I mean, after Big Ben Bay carved it out of wood, of course. That is not Benjamin Franklin's clock. That's Benjamin Banneker, a black man who made, not that particular one, but it was made in the casement called the Big Ben clock. Y'all heard of Big Ben's clock? A Moor. Big Ben Bay was Benjamin Banneker Bay. Okay, at these points of measuring, Higgins stated in Anacalypsis it took 40,000 years. Albert, the hell is Albert's the last name? It'll come back to me. In Primordial Man stated 100,000 years. A couple of others. It gets back.
Churchwood.
Thank you. Albert Churchwood gets back to 200,000-300,000 years of black folks dealing in this science. And then, of course, the European come along and says, it came from outer space. And it might have. But if it got out there, the ones that got it out there came from down here, is what they're not talking about, including your buddy, Dr. Whatchamajig. What's his name? It'll come back to me in a minute. No, the one that talks about space folks and stuff out of New York. Yeah, right. We forgot about. Yeah, he come out and did all this Eurocentric point of view about outer space and space beings, and he mentioned black folks once, and it turning out to be the ones that came to here from outer space came from here and been out there beyond our count. You know. But I don't want to get off. I'm trying to keep us centered here by beginning with the knowledge of self and the people in your world. I said the 12 people. That's all there are. The blueprints are 12. Variations of. Okay, you have it right there in the Bible. The 12,000. This whole concept is in the book of Revelations. Yeah. The 12,000 tribes, or the 12,000 from the 12 tribes, so to speak. Okay. But the blueprint, again, is setting the standard, the blueprint of human beings. Notice I didn't say men, I said human beings. As we're so Western oriented, every time we think of human, we think man first, then woman. And I don't know no man that's given birth to no woman. See? And we need to understand that. One of the problems of appreciating your lady, your sister, your mother, and your grandmother is that we don't have enough knowledge about who she is. And why we don't have enough knowledge about ourselves. Because from whence we come is from and through her. That's the whole concept of mother and son. So we're going to deal with those 12 personalities and the forces. We're not going to talk about planets. We're going to talk about energy, because that's what planets do. They send out energy as they gather it in their circular movements in their orbit around the sun. And as this particular sun gets its energy from a greater sun, and from that area comes the spiritual sun, the invisible. And I want you to keep in mind, when we talk about things, objects, we must talk about their correspondence. Okay, because everything, I need some Scotch tape. Everything has a invisible base. Inside your physical body is a spiritual body. Even preachers will tell you that. So inside the planet Earth is a spiritual Earth. Inside the planet Sun, the luminary, is a spiritual sun. But as our planet takes its point of focus from the sun and making its orbit around the sun, as it rotates on its axis, two motions, this solar system takes for its point of view a greater sun. And as we are rotating and orbiting in our ecliptic circle, the solar system is orbiting in its ecliptic circle around a greater sun. And in the field or center of this universe, as the Masters of Perfection teach, and as astrology explains, there is a field of energy that is intelligent. The dynamic force that feeds, supports, sustains our universe. That is Allah. That is Jehovah. That is the great Brahman in Hindu. Any of those great names is an attempt to name something so enormous that the individual can't even figure it out, let alone give it a name. But remember, religion relates through ritual and symbols. Then there's the manifestation of which each one of you are a manifestation of the universe, a manifestation of God on planet Earth, embodied. A manifestation of the universe. The head Pisces, bent over, the head Aries, bent over backwards, touching the feet Pisces, is the full circle of 360 degrees. And the 12 parts of that body measuring the circle of Zodiac. Okay? That's the language of astrology. The science, the knowledge of self. This is a extracted blueprint of the great day of creation and evolution, taken from the Hindi concept of astronomy, astrology, in relationship to the evolutionary process of this planet and solar system. Everything evolves. I wish to goodness we had copy of the Kybalion here, because without those principles, this is not going to make much sense. But that's where the superstition gets in, because those that look at astrology do not have the base of what it's based upon. It's not based upon planets. It's based upon universal law. And the 7 cosmic laws of the universe are clearly explained in that little blue book, which the brother will have some here for us the next time you all come. Let me say this before I forget it. Like this, brother, I want you to have a tablet, one tablet, not a sheet of paper that Tuesday you can't find. And if you keep notes in one tablet, you can always go back to your notes. That's when you realize you're educated. Okay? When you can look back and say, damn, I didn't know that you knew that. Okay? You can keep up with what you've learned. And that's important, because that's one of the ways you measure your growth towards the measure of the fullness of the statue of Christ. If you keep in mind that you're on this path of life to win, and the only way you can win is to become God. That's the only way you can win it. I'm not talking about how much money you can get, how many cars, how many women, and so forth. The only way you can win down here is to become God. Because if you don't do it down here, you got to come back. And keep coming back till you get it done. Because that's what you are. John chapter 10, verses 31, 36, right there in the same Bible y'all been reading and carrying around and Mama been talking about. But she keep telling you about Jesus. See? And what is needed is somebody to tell you about you. That's what self-knowledge is about. That's what Moorish science is about. That's what astrology is about. It tells you about you as God, as a replica of the universe. That's what this knowledge does. If you wonder why so many children are lured into that world of shade and darkness, death and anger, greed and fear, because they have no knowledge of themselves. And it's easy to tell somebody, man, you ought to hook up with Satan. Because Satan rules everything down here. That's what they're telling you. If you're going to run with us, you got to follow Satan. That's what they tell those kids. I'm talking about black kids. You know, like 20 years ago, you'd hear about some group of white kids going in a demonic cult, and we go, oh, damn, you know. We didn't know that black children were susceptible to that kind of trickery, hoodwinking, because they like the knowledge of self. See? If you are not able to follow your God, you're going to follow somebody else's. You're going to follow somebody down here. Or fall into a derision of confusion as the ones who succumb to drugs. They are not following anybody. They're following their glands. And drugs have overwhelmed their glands, so they are slaves in the real sense of the word. A slave is not someone who works for someone else. A slave is someone who succumbs, surrenders to something else. That's what a slave is. There were some brothers that were caught up in the imprisonment of Europeans and fought like hell every day. He didn't give up. Nat Turner is only an example of one of them who resented that bullshit. He knew he wasn't nobody's monkey. And there were hundreds of thousands who knew that. Some chose death rather than slavery. Were certainly courageous, but not wise.